Namaste. Thank you all so much for showing up today. I was just saying this before everyone arrived, that it makes me so happy to see so many people interested in compassion. So thank you for taking the time out of your Sunday to be here. Together, we will be exploring what compassion means, what it really means, and we will be contemplating ways in which we can cultivate compassion and how we can actually put compassion in action, which is really the whole purpose of the spiritual journey, to learn to practice compassion beyond the theory. So we will begin with a moment of presence. And for that, you're welcome to stay as you are. If it feels comfortable to close your eyes, you can close your eyes, or you can keep a soft gaze towards the ground. And gently bring your awareness into your body. Notice how you feel. Notice any sensations in your body. Trying not to make a judgment, but simply becoming aware. Notice any emotions that might be present. Sometimes it's not just one emotion, but a mix. And again, try not to judge, but to be open to what arises in this moment. And now bring your awareness to your mind. And notice what is present on your mind at this moment. And again, see if you can allow whatever arises on your mind to be welcome. And now bring your awareness to your breath. And simply feel how the breath flows in and out of your body. And together we'll take a deep breath in. Open your mouth and gently release the breath. And very gently, in your own time, begin to move your body in any way that feels natural, intuitive. And when that feels complete, you can blink your eyes open and come back to the screen. Welcome once again, everyone. I personally like having my view on gallery view so I can see everyone. So if you want to do the same, you can. I think it's somewhere in the settings on the top right if you're on a laptop, and you can pick gallery view and then you can see everyone. And it's like we're all together in a room almost. So once that's done, I'll share a little bit about the intention for this satsang, for this webinar on compassion and kindness. So a few months ago, I was on a silent retreat in Mexico, and I had this feeling of we need to know more about compassion. As kids, as adults, as human beings, the world really needs compassion. Everyone needs compassion. And sometimes we might use this word. I know that for me, it was actually a realization when I was taught that compassion wasn't pity. So we will be talking today about the definition of compassion. And so it felt like this obvious thing to do to offer this gathering. And as always, the question arose, will anyone come? And the inner answer was, it doesn't matter. So again, I'm very happy that it's something that many of you are interested in. And, as always, I share from what I've learned. I will be mentioning different teachers and spiritual masters and sharing a little bit from personal experience as always. And of course, you can take what resonates and leave what doesn't. And if you want to chip in, you're always very welcome to in the form of writing, or you can also unmute yourself, raise your hand. Just know that if you speak, you will be on the recording, which I will be sharing with other people. So just to be aware of that. So the first thing that seemed important when thinking of how to share about this topic, compassion and kindness, was to look at the definition of compassion. So I created a PowerPoint. So I'll be sharing from it. And we will be going back and forth a little bit between the PowerPoint and just talking. So here. So compassion and kindness. And the first quote that I wanted to share is a quote by this wonderful Buddhist nun, Pema Chodron, who has been a true inspiration for me and many others on this path of learning to be compassionate. And I appreciate that Pema starts with, well, the quote I chose is a definition of what compassion is not. So Pema said, compassion is not a relationship between the healer and the wounded. It's a relationship between equals. And this seems very important, and we will elaborate on this. But first, we'll look at another definition by this great soul, Nelson Mandela, who said, "Our compassion binds us one to the other, not in pity or patronizingly, but as human beings." So again, Mandela echoed this sense that compassion is not something that makes from someone superior looking down on someone inferior, but it's actually something that binds us as human beings. And in that, there is no hierarchy. So between the sense of, someone who needs help and the helper. And a compassion by Gautama Buddha. Compassion is the wish to see others free from suffering. So the wish to see others free from suffering. And we'll stop sharing here for a moment. And again, I think, for many of us, often we might see compassion as pity, like this feeling of feeling sorry for someone else, right? And I loved this differentiation when I heard it, is that when your fear touches someone else's suffering, it is pity. And when your love touches someone else's suffering, it's compassion. So when the fear in us perceives the suffering in another, then it becomes pity. And that often manifests as almost like a rejection of the other's suffering. And we might have experienced that if we're faced with someone who is maybe in a less abled body or in a state of a lot of suffering. There may be, or they may not. This is often, something, a result of our conditioning. So it's not something to judge. There can sometimes be a tendency to look away when we perceive suffering. And if we have been cultivating compassion, then we will have a tendency actually to look rather than looking away. But it's important to learn not to be absorbed by the suffering and taking it on, which then can make us unable to take action. So we will also look at that, at how we can practice compassion in a way that is helpful and supportive to ourselves and others rather than absorbing. And so this tendency to look away is often because we don't know what to do with the suffering. And I remember speaking, I was actually quite young, and this was in Mexico, and I was speaking to the parent of a child who was in a wheelchair. And I remember, interacting with the child, and I think I said something like, "Is it okay, that I'm interacting with your child?" And the parent actually said, "Please and thank you. One of the most painful things of having a child who is disabled is that people look away." So this tendency to almost be like, "I don't know what to do," so just looking away. And this parent said to me, "Actually, no, please, please interact with my child." So this ability to, when our love touches the other's suffering, how different is that to when our fear touches the other's suffering, right? To see the other, they are suffering, and we can interact. It might just be a smile. It might just be a gaze, maybe just eye contact to say, "I see you. I see you and I recognize you, not as lesser than me, but as equal." The fact that someone is in a less abled body or in a situation of suffering does not make them inferior by any means. We are equals, and I can recognize your suffering because I also know suffering. Because to be human, ultimately, is to suffer. And this might sound, pessimistic. I think when I was first introduced to Buddhist teachings, I was like, all right, well, human life is not all suffering. And it's true. Human life is beautiful. Human life is full of joy as well. And also, one of the first teachings of the Buddha is that life is dukkha, life is suffering. And he said this based on the fact that human beings experience disease, they experience old age if they're lucky, they experience loss, and as a result, grief. And so whether we are going through a difficult phase at the moment or not, we can acknowledge that suffering is part of human life. And so from that acceptance that suffering is part of human life, when we recognize suffering in another, it's almost like we can recognize it in ourselves. It's the same suffering, right? It might be caused for different reasons, but it's the same essence of dukkha, of suffering. And when we're able to recognize another's suffering as the same suffering that we experience, then naturally we experience this closeness, this intimacy with the other, right? To see your suffering is the same as my suffering, and we're equal on this earth. And we all experience it to some degree or another. And we cannot deny that certain humans undergo much more suffering than others. And so if we are fortunate to not be experiencing immense suffering, then I believe that we have a responsibility and a duty to try to alleviate suffering where we can. So we also have to acknowledge that as a single individual, we cannot alleviate the suffering of all of humanity. How wonderful would that be, right? If we were told, if you really, really wish it, then you could abolish suffering. Well, it's not that yet. I don't know, maybe one day we will be able to, we will be so spiritually evolved that we will be able to absorb suffering and dissolve it. Certain beings are said to have that capacity through a beautiful meditation practice called Tonglen. And it's not necessarily of all of humanity in a flash, otherwise there would be no more suffering, but this ability to absorb suffering and to dissolve it in one's true self, so not on a personal level, is a Tibetan Buddhist practice that exists known as Tonglen, which I've shared before with some of you. So another definition of compassion that can be helpful is deep empathy. Feeling the pain of others combined with a willingness to do whatever is possible to alleviate that pain. So here it's very clear that yes, it's empathy, but it's not just empathy. It's not just feeling the pain of the other. The acting aspect is a very important component of this concept of compassion. So it's not just feeling the pain and then maybe talking about the other's pain and feeling sorry and staying in that realm of talking, right? We can talk about the suffering that is happening, but then sometimes we can get stuck in that. But here, clearly, it's empathy in action or love in action. And I want to share again this beautiful image of Green Tara. I have her tattooed on my right thigh as a reminder to take action when possible. So here she is, Green Tara. And you can see that her right leg is extended. And we might ask, most goddesses and deities are the symbology, so how they are represented is not random. And the reason Green Tara has her right leg extended is because it symbolizes action, right? So she's not just feeling the pain of humanity and all sentient beings, she's ready to bounce and to take action. What is needed? What can I do in this moment? So Green Tara, the Tibetan Buddhist goddess of compassion, is seen as the embodiment of enlightened action, a guide who helps remove obstacles and relieve suffering. And here we'll look a little bit at these two definitions of bodhicitta and bodhisattva. So bodhicitta can be translated as the intention of awakening. And if we separate these two words, so bodhi can be defined as enlightened or awakened, and citta is often translated as mind, but actually it's not in this lower mind concept of manas, but rather this higher intellect associated to buddhi. And in this definition, citta can be translated as soul or heart. So bodhicitta can actually be translated as awakened heart, the awakened heart, or the awakened mind, or the enlightened heart. And we can use this term bodhicitta as this pure intention or this heartfelt wish to attain enlightenment for the benefit of all beings. It is often described as compassion and wisdom united. So compassion and wisdom together, inseparable. And why is wisdom so important? So wisdom being the true wisdom, so not an intellectual knowing of things, but the wisdom that we are not separate, that we are all connected, with compassion so that we can act with wisdom, not out of fear, not out of panic or desperation, but out of this pure love for the other. And a bodhisattva is a person or a being who has generated bodhicitta and commits to the path of awakening in order to help all beings become free of suffering. And so if you are here on this call it means that you are already familiar with bodhicitta. And sometimes we might think, these concepts are reserved to monks who live in faraway lands. But the truth is that bodhicitta is our true nature. And this is why all saints and sages and mystics are the pure embodiments of bodhicitta. Because when the ego has been removed, all that is left is the awakened heart, is bodhicitta. And so you'll notice moments when you took selfless action were moments where the ego was lessened. And motherhood is really, although I'm not a biological mother myself, I feel, I've said this before, I feel I am a mother to many. And motherhood really is an invitation to bodhisattva, a dedication of one's life to another. Because naturally you are asked, right? First, a mother, a biological mother, is asked to give up her body to make space for another body. And then she has to give her energy. Well, she has to. She doesn't have to, but often mothers are naturally inclined, inspired to give their energy, literally giving their milk. So giving the prana, the life force they've absorbed, to another living creature, their child in this case. And so the path of motherhood often awakens bodhicitta in women, but it is not the only path. And it's very important to say that this bodhicitta should be extended not only to one's children, not only to one's loved ones, not only to the people we find easy to love, but to all beings as much as possible and as often as possible. And bodhicitta is actually a concept, the term itself is a concept that is used in Buddhism, but is actually also one of the core values of Christianity. If you're already familiar with Christian teachings, if we look at Jesus's sermons and his message, his core message, was love one another. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. And one that I actually had to write down because I think it's so beautiful. Jesus said, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters, you did for me. So what you do for another is what you're doing for me. And when Jesus spoke to himself as me, he was really referring to the pure soul, to the self with a capital S. So ultimately, serving another is serving the divine, which is ourselves, our true essence. So serving others is really serving ourselves. So I'll share once again with a beautiful quote by Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi. And so asking, because we might hear all these teachings and we already feel inspired. And it's like, of course, I want to be more compassionate. And the attitude to cultivate is, as Gandhi said, to be the change you want to see in the world. Be the change you want to see in the world. So how, a little tap, say world, how to make the world a kinder place. I finished this morning, so how to make the world a kinder place. So from concepts to practice. So the first thing that we can do is to be generous. To be generous with our time, with our things, with presence, with love. To be kind. So help when possible, give a hug, listen to a friend, offer support. To be tolerant. And this isn't always easy. We might find it easy to be kind, especially to people we love, to offer support, but to be tolerant is also a big expression of compassion. When someone is perhaps slower than us at learning something, let's say a parent asks you for help figuring out how to use their phone, being tolerant with the pace of their learning is an expression of compassion. So remembering that we are all on our journey and we are all trying our best, and it looks different for everyone. So the fact that we find certain things easy doesn't mean that it's easy for everyone. And finally, well, there could be many more things, but being present. So be present. When we are present, we are available to life. So these values, of generosity, love, presence, generosity, acceptance, kindness, are the opposite of resentment, hate, vengeance, competition, judgment. And whilst deep inside we may want to embody these values, it's not always easy, because we are often taught from a very young age that we need to look out for ourselves. Right? At school, compassion is often not a value that it's taught. It's often more competition, right? It's more about winning, even when it comes to grades, right? I remember in class, right, when you were doing an exam, you kind of hide your answers. And I was very fortunate to have friends who let me copy their answers, which is not always helpful. But I got caught once copying, right? But thinking of how this is like a physical expression from a very young age, you're like, no, don't look at, because if you do as well as I did, then I am no longer the winner, right? And there's a beautiful term, and I wish I knew the tribe that it comes from, but it's a tribe in Africa. And this is, I don't know if it's a real story or a parable, but there was a group of people, of Westerners, who visited a tribe in Africa. I don't know the country. But when they visited, they said to the kids in the village, whoever wins, and some of you are familiar with this, but whoever wins the race will be granted this basket full of goodies. And you can imagine, right? Living in poor conditions, and to be told that you could win a basket full of goodies would be very exciting. So they were told they had to run from here to here, and there was a finish line. And what the kids did is that at the beginning of the race, they all held hands and they ran holding hands all the way to the finish line. So they all won, right? And these researchers, Westerners, when they saw that at the end, they were kind of like, why did you do that? And one of you could clearly win. Like, there were some who were older who definitely had the capability of winning. And their answer was Ubuntu. And Ubuntu referred to, I feel emotional just saying it and feel, body shivers. This concept of, if we all win, then we all won, right? Rather than like, I want to win so that I can be the best, and which is, of course, ego. But if we all hold hands to the finish line, then it's win, 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 right? And so imagine what the world would look like, what society would look like, if we were all operating from this concept of Ubuntu. Of, rather than striving to win over another, we were trying to help one another. Like you have a colleague who's maybe struggling with, I don't know, PowerPoint. I don't even know if people really use this these days, but instead of thinking, well, I don't want to waste my precious time, that where I need to move forward on my project, and they better figure out themselves, but to say, oh, do you need a hand? And when we help, of course, we don't do this out of expectation of something in return. But there's another beautiful quote that says, the people of love are loved through their love. The people of love are loved through their love. And so often, I said this to my mom recently, because she often gets receives so much love from neighbors, she's like, oh, the neighbor gave me this thing. And I'm like, yeah, remember that time when you helped her for like 2 days clear out her apartment? And she's like, oh, it was nothing, but the ability to say, to make selfless decisions, I will take my time to help someone else who is not promising anything in return, out of the love of being helpful, of being kind. And naturally, of course, those who help others will be helped by others, although that shouldn't be the intention. So we don't practice compassion in expectation. That would be not the essence of these teachings at all, but just for the love of being kind. And then imagine what that looks like in the world, right? If all of us are continuously looking for ways to serve our neighbors, our family members, etc. And sometimes it's a lot easier in theory than it is in practice. So in theory, I think, if I said, raise your hand if you want to be compassionate, we're all like, me, yeah. And then maybe your partner doesn't wash the dishes and you cooked. And in that moment, what comes to mind is like, but I cooked and you said you were going to wash the dishes, and you know how it goes. So I don't need to go into detail. What would compassion in action look like in that moment if we were able to see the other? Maybe they're exhausted. Of course, we don't want it to become a habit, right? So there may need to be a communication process there, but maybe they're going through a difficult time, a stressful time. And if we're able to connect to compassion, to see the other as ourselves and recognize, oh, you're having a really hard time. You know what? Let me cook and wash this time. Again, this is not about enabling unhealthy behaviors. Sometimes there can be relationships where we can feel like, it's not equal, and there may need to be communication had, conversations where we speak about these things with vulnerability. But on occasion, it may be that the energy exchange is not equal. And that is okay. Whether it's a child or a colleague or a parent or a friend, where we can say, let me do that. I'll do it. It's okay. I can do it. And often we'll discover that serving others is actually very gratifying. We might think that we're doing it for another, but ultimately it's so, I feel gratifying doesn't really, it's so fulfilling. That's a better word. So fulfilling to serve others. And the more we do it, the more natural it becomes. At first, the mind will come with things like, but it's not fair. I did it last time. And, these kind of like measuring. Maybe some of us might even like keep a spreadsheet, right? Of like, I did this last time and my brother didn't do it last time. And so now it's his turn, and et cetera, et cetera. And this kind of behavior, of course, is all ego driven, because the ego is looking out for itself always. It might be looking out for its loved ones because they're extensions of ourselves, but it's still a very limited range of people. It's like me and people with my last name. Those I can take care of. Anything past my picket fence, it's up to them how they figure life out. And it's good to acknowledge that so that we can dissolve that. Because when we don't acknowledge it, we're in denial. So we might say, no, I have no problem giving to others, but ultimately we're just staying within that illusion. And again, this is not for the purpose of feeling guilty, right? Because that doesn't help anyone. Shaming and guilting ourselves doesn't bring on spiritual progress. It just keeps us feeling identified with ways in which we've been in the past. We are always behaving from our level of consciousness. So past behavior was an expression of where we were at then. we might look back and say, oh, that really wasn't so great of me, actually. I wish I had behaved differently then. Given the opportunity again, I would behave differently. I would. And we make that commitment. And then given the opportunity again, we find that naturally, because we've reflected on this, we've contemplated how we can be more compassionate. And then given the opportunity, we naturally begin to become who we want to be. But wishful thinking is not enough. It's a spiritual evolution that happens through the very slow dissolution of the ego. And I say very slow intentionally because often it's painfully slow. You know, we're like, no, I want to be a better person. I want to. And then a situation arises, and again, we get stuck in egoic patterns. And so it's important that we also apply compassion to ourselves. When we see that, again, we fell back into these egoic values of me, for me, and for mine, if we're lucky, then we can pause, self-compassion, and a commitment to try to continue to observe ourselves with love, with acceptance, and with this commitment really to evolve, to grow. And there's a beautiful Buddhist practice, which is seeing a beggar or a homeless person as if it's a man, your father or your grandfather, or if it's a woman, you know, your sister. And you can imagine how differently we would act in the street if you walked past a beggar or a homeless person and you imagine that they were your father or your mother. We wouldn't be able to look away, would we? Right? Instantly, it would be like, what do you need? I mean, if you really saw them as your parent, you'd probably take them home and be like, do you want to move in? And I understand that this may not be possible, right? Yes, Bella. So we may not be able to take in all the homeless people. There was a moment when I was living in London, and there was a man living in front of a shop that I would go to often. And I remember thinking about it and asking my housemates, I was like, do you think we could invite him over to have a shower? And my housemates were like, absolutely not. And I was like, okay, I just thought I'd ask. And you know, they were probably right. We were three women. He was a man, and it's complex, right? To offer something like that for someone to come into your home. So it's good to acknowledge the real limitations that might be there. However, we can probably all afford a meal for someone else, right? And many people will say, yeah, but there's, you know, so many homeless. I remember the last time I went to the United States, I was actually quite shocked by the amount of homelessness. So it was really overwhelming. So of course, if there are hundreds of homeless people, you might think, well, I can't do anything. But maybe there is an existing kitchen. There are these beautiful projects of feeding the homeless, and you might be able to give a day a week, or maybe a day a month, or maybe a day every 3 months. Or maybe you don't have much time of money, and then you make a donation, or maybe you have food stored in your cupboards that's been there for months. And so often when we look at the problem from afar, it just looks so huge that it's like, well, there's nothing that I could do. But if we zoom in and you look at that one homeless person who sits outside of your local shop, then probably, you know, it might be, and these are not, you know, to-dos that you personally have to do, but ideas. Every time you go to that shop, maybe asking them, you know, what would you like to eat? And you can get them a sandwich and a drink. Maybe. And maybe not, right? We may not be in a financial situation where we can do that, But maybe when we cook, we can cook for two and we can bring them a warm meal if it's not too far. So the acting dimension of compassion is not something that is kind of optional. To be compassionate is to be active, is empathy in action, it's love in action. And what that looks like is different for all of us, depending on our dharma. So our personal sense of purpose, our svadharma. And the dharma depends on our karma. So who you are will define what you can do, right? If we are, let's say, a man, it may not be our purpose to help women who have been victims of abuse, naturally, right? But if you are a woman who has been victim of abuse, perhaps there is an opportunity to help others who have faced similar situations because there's an understanding of what that feels like. And sometimes if it's too close, it can be complex. So it may not be. But considering that who we are will determine the ways in which we can help, in which we can offer support. And just going back on this theme of compassion, there's a beautiful story of the Buddha and his first disciple, Ananda. So the Buddha's first disciple, Ananda, asked the Buddha, would it be true to say that the cultivation of loving kindness and compassion is part of the practice? So Ananda asked this to the Buddha. And the Buddha said, no, it wouldn't be right to say that the cultivation of loving kindness and compassion is part of the practice. It would be right to say that cultivating loving kindness and compassion is all of our practice. So if we are on the spiritual path, which we all are because we're here together, then we have to acknowledge that the purpose of yoga and meditation and whatever we might practice, japa mala, repeating mantra, is not so that we may sleep better and, I don't know, look younger for longer. Recently, a dear friend who is here actually, who went to the most recent silent retreat I guided, said at the end of the retreat, what she noticed was that everyone looked brighter and lighter. And she said it was better than a facelift. And I absolutely agree. But we don't practice for the sake of looking better, right? Or so that we may sleep better. Or I remember when I was teaching yoga in the community in Bocas del Toro, where I used to live, I began the yoga for kids. This was like for the local kids. And so I asked, what is yoga and what is it for? And one of the little girls was like, para perder peso, to lose weight. And I was like, not really, no. It can, that can be a result, but it's not for that. And I thought it was so interesting, that that's what a little Panamanian girl thought yoga was for. Obviously heard, from a parent. And we might laugh, but also many adults think that yoga is, for getting stronger, being more flexible, and meditation is to have less anxiety. And yes, these are all beautiful byproducts, but they're not the purpose. The purpose of the spiritual journey is to become a bodhisattva, to become an enlightened one, to become this embodiment of pure love without ego, without the fear of what if I don't have enough, what if mine don't have enough, but to really embody these values of generosity and kindness and tolerance and acceptance. And like I said, it's not always easy to embody that, even with our loved ones. Sometimes it's even harder with our loved ones because we're so close that it's almost like we're too close. And then by then it's like, well, you're just as good as me. And if I'm tough with me, then I'll be tough with you. And so to learn to practice this, it's so easy, right? To say it's terrible what is happening in Sudan, in Gaza, in Cuba, in so many parts of the world, in Ukraine. It's so terrible what is happening, and to feel empathy in our hearts. And then when our neighbor parks, inadequately, we might go home and speak about them and say what a terrible person they are, not knowing that maybe they injured their back and they had to park in that way because they need to be closer to their home. I just made that story up. But often we see the acts without considering behind that action, there's a human being just like me, who struggles sometimes to make the best decisions, because we all do at times. We all sometimes make decisions that we then think, that wasn't the best one, right? But if we can be compassionate towards ourselves and compassionate to those who are nearest to us, then often we naturally we radiate this love and compassion. And if we're compassionate to the person who was a bit of an a-hole to us, then they also benefit from that. So the person, who kind of like cuts the line in traffic, and instead of beeping and calling them names, not that I imagine any of you doing that, although I have been shocked at times by close girlfriends, we get in the car and it's like they transform and they're like swearing and calling names. And I'm like, what happened? And it's interesting because these are people that I would consider loving. Thank you for raising your hand, because it's good to acknowledge, right? The spaces where we find it harder to be compassionate. For some, it might be at work. It's like at home with their friends, with their families. People find it so easy to be compassionate. And then we get to work and someone left, I don't know, the printer in use, didn't remove their paper. And in our mind, we're like, how dare they? They're so selfish. I'll throw their papers to the bin. They should have cleared it, or whatever the story might be, right? Where did the compassion go there? It's like all of a sudden compassion, it's like we have compassion for certain scenarios, but for others, absolutely not, non-negotiable. So being able to observe that in ourselves, so that then we can really embody these values. And I'll share something that can be somewhat controversial intentionally, because compassion is something that we ideally want to aspire to extend not just to those with whom it's easy to practice compassion, but way beyond, with those with whom it's difficult. And there was a gathering, so where Thich Nhat Hanh was invited to speak. Many of you are probably familiar with Thich Nhat Hanh. He has now passed away, but he was this great Buddhist teacher. And he was asked to do a meditation, a prayer for the victims of rape and murder by these men who were really referred to as pirates on an island, from an island in Vietnam. And so someone in the public, so this was like a conference, asked Thich Nhat Hanh, can we do a prayer for the victims, of these horrendous happenings? And Thich Nhat Hanh said, yes, but first we will do a meditation for the perpetrators. And this, of course, perpetrator means those who did their wrong deeds. And this can be very difficult for us to hear, because we naturally feel more inclined to feel compassion for the victims, right? The obvious victim. And I want to say obvious victim because ultimately all are victims. And when we see, right, when we see someone suffering at the hand of someone else, it's very easy to see the sufferer, the obvious sufferer, the victim, as the one who is suffering. And actually, I'll use an example from, recent personal experience. As many of you know, I volunteer with kids from the community here in Guatemala. And there is a kid who is particularly violent. So he's generally the one that I have to, he doesn't come with us anymore so much because he's 13 now. So he's kind of cool. But when I started working with them, he was 9. And it was always quite tricky because he would be physically violent with other children. He would swear. And it was difficult to deal with him because, for me, the first thing that I saw is that this kid was hitting other kids, often younger kids, sometimes girls. And so I naturally, saw him as a problem that I was like, oh, what do I do with this kid? He's often violent, physically violent, and abusive verbally, and would say sometimes things that I was just like, well, how do I deal with this? And soon enough, I met his father, who's an alcoholic. The mother passed away when he was 5. He's one of 4. And the father, I found out, is most violent with him, the father who's an alcoholic. So this boy would receive beatings, not a smack, but belt beatings from his drunk father to protect his other siblings. And so his behavior was naturally a direct reflection of the violence he was experiencing at home. When this boy grows up, if he were to become a violent man, it would be so easy to think of him as a bad person, right? Forgetting, because many of us don't know the past of the people that we see as perpetrators. We often don't know the past of these people. But the truth is that most of the time, these people were also victims. I have a dear friend who works in prisons in London. She's been working in prisons for as long as I remember. We've been friends since we were 15. And so we often have quite deep conversations about life. And she was sharing with me that it's so heartbreaking that almost every single person who's in prison for violence, when you look at their records, was beaten as a child. Like that's almost like, and those who are in prison for rape were raped. It's kind of like almost always the case. And so when we see someone behaving in a way that we don't approve of, if we are able to, instead of going to our immediate reaction, which would be judging them, maybe criticizing them, maybe even punishing them in some way or form, if we're able to step back and consider they're also a victim. Because being violent is a terrible thing. Causing suffering is a reflection of inner suffering. And this saying, hurt people is so true. So when someone causes suffering to someone else, it's naturally a reflection of their inner state of suffering. And this is not to say that we condone violence. This is not to say that we enable violence. So sometimes compassion can be misunderstood as allowing, right? If someone is violent towards us, being compassionate doesn't mean allowing it. If someone is taking advantage of us, it doesn't mean, being compassionate doesn't mean saying, okay, you can do anything. We can set boundaries in a loving way. We can say no in a compassionate way. And we can take the action that is necessary still from a place of love. So being compassionate does not mean that we allow the unacceptable, right? With this boy, what I had to do is often I had like a 3-strike thing where I would say, if you do something again, then this is the second strike, if you like until the 3rd strike, and then you have to leave. And often it would break my heart to say, this is the 3rd time that you hit someone. for today, you can't participate anymore because I was on my own and I couldn't allow kids to be hit. And it was so heartbreaking. But he learned that hitting others when we were together, I tried to express that it was never okay. But how do you teach a child who receives violence from a parent that hitting is not okay? It's very difficult. But I had to implement some rules to keep the other kids safe by saying, if you do this 3 times, and then he learned that I meant it. You know, if you insult someone 3 times or one of those things, then you will have to leave. Or you won't have, you won't have cake or something like that. And often then I would try to have like a resolution. So meeting just with him and say, why did you do that? Do you feel good when you receive this, et cetera, et cetera? So it's very important that we're clear that compassion doesn't mean being a doormat. Being compassionate can sometimes look like stern, loving action. We say no from a place of love. And it's a good question to ask ourselves, how quickly can we feel compassion for someone else when they've wronged us? And that reflects our spiritual evolution. Not how long we can meditate, not how long we can stay in a headstand, not how long we can stay silent. All of that is irrelevant if we're not able to go to compassion eventually. And sometimes it might take years. So we also need to be compassionate with ourselves when that's the case. But the quicker we're able to go from resentment to compassion, the more that reflects the inner work. So whether it's, for someone we see that has wronged us personally, or for a group of people who are currently committing some atrocities. And that can be so difficult because in our mind, we create a story of this is a bad person, this is the abuser, the perpetrator. And how can I have compassion for someone who is bad? But if we go back to the story of this boy that I just shared, if we consider that to commit atrocities, one must suffer internally. There is no other way. And we can see it in ourselves, right? When we're happy, when we feel peaceful and light, how do we behave in the world? Right? When you woke up feeling good, everything feels right. You walk out the door and you're like, morning, neighbor, I'll take your trash. Don't worry. When you're peed off and tired and exhausted and worried and frustrated, you might even like kick their trash a little bit, like not too visibly, but a little bit like they left it out again. So noticing in ourselves how we behave when we're feeling loving and at peace, we radiate that. We want to help. We want to serve. So how can we be compassionate in the world? By filling up our cup. Spending time in nature, moving our bodies, nourishing our bodies with good foods, not looking at screens for too long, reading a good book, drinking herbal teas rather than 3 coffees a day, which sets our nervous system completely off balance, resting enough, saying kind words to ourselves. All of these things are the ways we can look after ourselves so that then we can be the beings that we want to be. Wishful thinking is not enough. If only it were, right? To want to be a good person, and then we naturally become that. So intention, sankalpa, is very important. That icha, that heartfelt intention, like I want to be, I really aspire to be a bodhisattva. I want this to be my way of living, compassionate towards all beings. And that must be our inspiration to make decisions that serve. But just the wishful thinking is not enough. And we know that probably, because it can happen to us in a relationship where we're like, no, I won't argue anymore. I want to be loving and caring. And then in the situation, it doesn't happen again. Patience, perseverance, and practice. Spiritual practice is the path to enlightenment. And we might ask what the spiritual practice look like. If you know me, you probably already know what I'm going to say. Meditation. Meditation is this time where we sit with ourselves without distractions and with humility and tolerance and compassion and acceptance, we see ourselves as we are. And we can see that it's not always all pretty, right? When we welcome Avidam. We started an hour ago, but you're very welcome to stay in and I'll share the recording with you both. So we may see when we come to our meditation cushion that maybe we're not as kind and loving as we thought we were. When recurring thoughts are about what someone did to us or the things that we didn't do as we wish we had done, etc. So meditation is really an invitation to be with ourselves as we are. And with that, to make peace, to really make peace with all of it. And sometimes we can make things right, and sometimes we cannot, and we still need to make peace. And I'll share a quote by this great Chinese sage, Lao Tzu. I've shared it with many of you many times because I always find it to be such an important reminder of how we create a peaceful world. Lao Tzu said, "For there to be peace in the world, there must be peace in the nation. For there to be peace in the nation, there must be peace in the home. And for there to be peace in the home, there must be peace in the heart." So how do we bring peace on earth? By creating a peaceful inner world. By creating an inner peaceful dimension. And the truth of it is that we don't need to create it because our true nature is peace. We just need to reveal it. And how do we reveal it? By chipping away at the ego, one thought at a time, one pattern at a time. And like I said earlier on, this often seems like a very slow process because we might sit in meditation for 20 minutes and it feels like all that happened was thinking, maybe with a millisecond pause of no thinking and then back to thinking. And this is okay. This is the practice. So if we care about creating a peaceful world, if we care about embodying these values, then we have to commit to a practice because this is how we do it. So I wanted to share a few more, actually a couple of poems, and then I shared them when we did the How Not to Lose Heart workshop. Some of you were there. So I'll just share them again because they're so beautiful and I actually repeat them every day as part of my practice, and I'll be sharing them with you as well. First, Shanti Deva's prayer. Try to listen with the heart. May I become food and drink in the eons of famine for those poverty-stricken sufferers. May I be a doctor, medicine, and nurse for all sick beings in the world until everyone is cured. May I become never-ending, wish-fulfilling treasures, materializing in front of each of them as all the enjoyments they need. May I be a guide for those who do not have a guide. May I be a leader for those who journey. And may I be boats and ships and beautiful parks for those who desire them, and light for those who need light. And may I become beds for those who need a rest, and a servant to those who need servants. May I always be the living conditions for all sentient beings until all sentient beings are enlightened. So we can imagine this level of bodhicitta in the heart to wish to be a bed for those who need a rest, to pray to be food for those who need food. When we really embody these values, the next time we come across someone who is hungry, if we have any food at all, we will give it to them. Naturally, without thought. And a beautiful quote by Mother Teresa: we cannot all do great things, but we can do small things with great love. Finally, before we do the love meditation, I will speak a little bit more actually, but I wanted to share again this peace prayer of St. Francis of Assisi that says, Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. O Divine Master, please grant that I not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. I intentionally chose to share these two prayers that I shared back in February again, because I think they're really inspiring us for us to consider what other human beings, just like us, because enlightened beings are also human beings who, just like us, once upon a time had the seed of compassion in their heart, and it blossomed through consciousness, through presence and choice, because it is a choice to embody compassion. And so now for this part of the workshop, what I wanted to speak of briefly is random acts of kindness. You may have heard this term before. I actually wrote a blog about this many years ago. I think it was like 7 years ago. So again, when we look at the state of affairs in the world, it's very easy to be, if we really allow ourselves to look at the situation, it's so heartbreaking that we may feel incapacitated when we look at what is really happening in certain parts of the world. But when we look at what is happening in our neighborhood, perhaps, or maybe in the city that we live in, often we will recognize that there are little things that we can do. And as Mother Teresa said, we cannot all do great things. We indeed don't have all the ability. I don't know if any of you have followed this incredible soul, Tiago de Avila, this Brazilian, I don't know what to call him. He's so incredible, but he's been sailing to Gaza time after time to try to deliver goods and been stopped time and time again. And he has a family, and we don't all have the capability, to do something like that. But we do all have the capacity to do small things with great love. And so these random acts of kindness eventually become spontaneous, but at first can need a little bit of guidance, like, how do we do random acts of kindness? And so what I wanted to offer is that if you feel inspired, is that within the next month, so today is the 17th of May, so by the 17th of June, to do 2 random acts of kindness minimum. So 2 would be, like the bare minimum. And the first random act of kindness would be for someone you love. So it might be, you probably know what they love, but sometimes we express love in our love language. And often what people want is for love to be expressed in their love language. So we might want to ask, what would make you happy? How can I help you? It can be a child, a son, a daughter, a parent, a partner, a friend. And sometimes we don't even need to ask. If you know that they're going through a tough time, maybe you send them a book to their address, a book that you love. Maybe you buy your colleague a herbal tea on the way to work and just say, I just went to the shop and I felt inspired to bring you this, a little care package or something like this. Expressing love without expecting anything in return. And this is very important because often when we express love, a little part of us is like, well, I did do that for them. And so then we kind of expect something in return, which then creates kind of not a great dynamic because there's an expectation there. So how can we do something completely selflessly? Maybe you offer a massage, maybe you offer to give someone something special. When we did the 31-day meditation program, the last cycle was back in January. I said, to everyone that ideally they should get a mala bead. And then one of the participants offered to buy one for another one of the participants. I thought that was so beautiful. And it feels so good when we're generous, when we're giving. It can be a little bit painful at first. If it's something we like, we're like, here, take it. No, I don't mind. I'm happy to give it. But once we've let go, it's like, it's true what St. Francis of Assisi said. It is in giving that we receive. It is in giving that we receive. And we don't always have financial abundance to give. So maybe we give our time. We offer to walk our neighbor's dog. We offer to do something small, take care of the grandchildren. Something small that actually might be huge for the other person. So 1 act of kindness for someone you love and 1 random act of kindness for someone you don't know. It might be buying a sandwich for a homeless person. It might be paying the tea or coffee of the person behind you in the line. It might be buying a flower for someone, for maybe a woman, and just, giving it to them. So often, once we start to open our hearts and mind to what we can do, we can see opportunities everywhere. At first, we might feel like, I have no idea of what I could do for anyone. Currently, there are children starving. This is a reality, and we can make donations. That is a beautiful random act of kindness. And we can also do something in our vicinity. So 1 random act of kindness for someone you love and 1 random act of kindness for someone you don't know. And you have a whole month. And you might find that once you get started, it's like this unstoppable machine of love that you just don't know how to control. It's a beautiful thing. And I'll share a few years ago at a cafe, and there was this, actually, I'm going to get it. There was this kind of covered in cobwebs, but there was this beautiful item in the coffee shop that said, there was a note with it, and it said, to whoever left the book, and I can't remember what the book was, thank you so much. It helped me immensely. If it's not you, you can take this and leave something in its place. And I was like, ooh, I love this. And so I then made a necklace, and I think a bracelet or a necklace. And then I left a note and I was like, if you find this, take it and leave something in exchange. I haven't been back. I don't know if there are still people exchanging things there, but you might want to leave a book that you love in a coffee shop and you put a note in there, you know, like, if you find this, enjoy, this is my favorite book. When you can, pass it on, you know? And then imagine if all of us, it starts with us, right? But imagine if all of us for this month, mid May to mid June, do random acts of kindness, leave a book somewhere, pay a coffee for the person behind you, let someone go in traffic, maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 cars, you know, you might get home a little later. Maybe they are more of in a rush than you are. Doing little things like that, and imagine all of these echoing. The butterfly effect is a true concept. The little things that we do, the little acts of kindness do really echo out into the world. So we cannot all do great things, but we can all do small things with great love. And I wanted to include a little moment of meditation. So I will guide you through a not very long meditation, but you can make yourself comfortable wherever you are. You can close your eyes or keep a soft gaze towards the ground. Relax your body. Relax the muscles in your face. Allow your breathing to slow down. And gently bring your awareness to your heart. You might feel the beating of your heart or not. Feeling how the breath caresses the heart space with every inhale and every exhale. Now the invitation is to visualize in front of you someone that you love very much. So imagine them sitting in front of you and let yourself feel the love that you feel for them. It might feel like it begins in the heart, but then it expands out to every cell of your body. It's like you're breathing love. And now keeping the sense of love in your heart and your being, let go of the image of the person you love very much. And now visualize in front of you someone that you feel indifferent about. It might be someone you see on your way to work or in the shop. And as you visualize them sitting in front of you, consider that just like you, this person has hopes and dreams and fears and worries. And see if you can maintain this love that you felt for the person that you already love, or this person that you previously felt indifferent towards. Recognizing that they also deserve love. Now gently letting go of the image of this person. If it feels okay to do so, you may want to invite into your awareness someone that you consider has wronged you. If no one comes up to mind, you can use maybe a politician or someone that you maybe don't currently have positive thoughts towards. And now consider that they too once were little children and babies. And that behind their behavior towards you or towards others, there is also a soul like you with hopes and dreams, fears and worries. And whilst it may not be easy to maintain the same level of love, we may want to remind ourselves that everybody needs compassion. Everybody longs for love, no matter who they are. Everybody longs for love. Slowly, we can allow the image of this person to dissolve as well. And now allow images of people you know to appear swiftly through your awareness, one after the other. Might be neighbors, colleagues, family members. No need to name them. Simply let images of people you know appear and disappear in your awareness. And consider that each and every single one of them, just like you, just like all of us, have hopes and dreams, fears and worries. Everyone longs for love, and everyone deserves compassion. And we can gently let go of any images of people we know. And now see if you can extend this love that you felt for the first person you brought into your awareness to all of humanity. To all human beings. whether you know them or will ever know them or not, considering that every single human being longs for love and deserves compassion. Every single one of us. We can now expand out to all sentient beings, all creatures in all the realms and the whole universe. And concluding with ourselves, extending that love and compassion to ourselves, acknowledging that we also long for love and deserve compassion. And if it feels okay to do so, you can wrap your arms around yourself, giving yourself a hug. When you're ready, you can release that hug and blink your eyes open in your own time. So this was a slightly condensed love meditation, as there was a lot I wanted to share with you all. I hope that you feel inspired, to go out into the world and share love and be love and embody love. I will stop recording and then I will just share a few more things so those who catch up have this to watch.